How's it, guys? Welcome back. Ready for chapter 10 of Trunk Calls. You ate what? There is something about something that needs explaining. Anonymous. Oh, yeah, don't say. I spent a couple of hours this afternoon talking to Johnny Osborne, and both of us agreed that the marula fruit was the elephant's favorite delicacy. After an orgy of the marula fruit, the elephant will pass a pile of nothing but marula seeds. I wish I had counted, but there must have been at least 200 pips in the one pile I looked at. Considering they're a little smaller than a golf ball, I would say that it was some kind of roughage. People often think that elephants get drunk on the marula fruit, but I doubt it. The only way to get an animal to perform like a drunk on a movie is to drug them. The behavior may change from eating a lot of marula, but certainly not to the point where the animal weaves and stumbles. In the early 50s, Ray Sparrow shot an elephant on his front veranda that had eaten too many marulas. Definitely a case of behavior change. Another delicacy of elephants are the tips of croton branches, Croton megalobotrias, after a bushfire has swept through. A combination of the charcoal and the oily substance produced by the tree makes it a treat for the pachyderms, often staining the elephant's ivory to a black color. The bark and seeds are ground up by the batonka and used to treat malaria. It goes without saying that it has the bitterest of tastes and burns like the fires of hell. Oh, as usual. The only thing I can compare it to is when I ate a few acacia albida seed pods once when I was trying to figure out why animals like them so much. During the Second World War, I'm told that commodities were very short, just like they are in Zimbabwe now. My mother grew up in the Songa area of the Congo, north of Kamina. They lived in the center of the Luba tribe, my mother speaking Chuluba fluently. In fact, she used to think in Chuluba because she figured God could only speak English and therefore couldn't read her evil thoughts if she was thinking in Chuluba. She, like myself, grew up running around the bush half naked with her spear and other hunting implements. For children there are never shortages. She and her friends would take a piece of grass, gently push it down a small hole into a termite mound, and then slowly take it out. The grass stem would be covered in termites that had bitten into the grass. The termites would be sucked off in one motion and eaten raw. The grass put back for more tasty morsels. I know this to be true because she showed me how to do it. She assured me they were better than oysters or snails. What I've been informed is like eating snot with a crash helmet. Sus, man. I've never eaten snails, and I don't think I ever will. She also used to hunt rats. She and her hunting party would flush the rats out of their holes, skin them, squeeze their guts out in one motion, and then roast them. On this one particular day, she took her prize home and found a precious tin of butter that had been hidden away. She opened her tin and used the whole lot to fry her delicacy. Just as she was about to eat it, her mother walked in and spoiled a would-be culinary delight. The big cats also like rodents, the porcupine being their favorite. I've heard porcupine is quite good eating. I'll have to try that one day. A full-grown porcupine weighs an average of 35 pounds, and if the cat is patient, is an easy meal. Most of the big cats, when they come across a porcupine, lay down in front of it with their paw upturned just in front of their prey. The porcupine is in a defensive position, with all the quills bristling, and the head tucked into its chest. After a while, it looks up to see why nothing is happening, and in that instant, the lion or leopard hooks the curious porcupine under its throat and flips it on its back. From that position, the cats are quite safe from the quills and make short work of their meals. I too have found porcupine meat very palatable, but I found it's best not mentioned if you're making small talk with a prospective girlfriend. That's from his first book. If there are two porcupines, it's a different story. The two stay nose to nose and spin around and around in a defensive dance as they move away from the predator. I came across two of these bristly characters recently on my farm, and while one of my boys kept a spotlight on them, I got a long stick to try and flip one on its back. One of the porcupines swung its prickly tail sideways against the stick so hard that it left one of its quills embedded in the stick. I was quite impressed. Contrary to common belief, the porcupine does not throw its quills. The Taylors, Commons and Niches recently spent some time at Mana Pools together. Andrew and Kieran Niche would ask me all kinds of questions about the bush. Can you eat this and can you eat that? I pointed out different bushes that produced fruit, but with the overpopulation of baboons, it was impossible to find anything edible. Have you ever eaten a rat, Uncle Bill? Asked young Kieran. Yes, I replied, hoping that a short attention span would lead to other questions. I was right. It led to the next question. In his very proper fashion, Kieran asked, would it be too much trouble to tell me about it? I had been in Thailand, backpacking all over Asia. We had travelled by bus up to a small town called Pai, near the Burmese border. Before we boarded the bus, we had all been given little plastic bags. I wondered what they were for, but was soon to find out. As we began along the mountain roads, people were getting sick into their plastic bags and then throwing them out of the window. Sus. I guess that's better than them vomiting inside the bus, eh? I'd rented a bungalow outside of town, far away from all the other tourists. On my first day, I wandered into town and sat down in a secluded corner, just observing. I always loved watching the young tourists, with their untainted view on life, dealing with locals. As I sat there watching, a long-haired local came down the street and sat next to me. He was about half my size, and just sat looking in the same direction I was looking. He finally looked into my face and nodded. I nodded back. With a touch as gentle as a light breeze, he put his two hands around my upper thigh. I was wearing rugby shorts, and I guess he hadn't seen jumbo legs before. He held his hands up in front of him and said, "Two Thai men." Then looking back at me, he said, "Where from?" "Zimbabwe," I replied. "Rhodesia." Surprised, I nodded. "You?" And he made the sign. Surprised, I nodded. "You?" And he made the sign of a finger pulling a trigger on a gun. Again I nodded. Then he sat up straight and surprised me. "Actually, I am a graduate of Oxford University and I own that restaurant over there. My name is Lee, and you are my guest for the rest of your stay." Lee taught me to listen to classical music at breakfast, which I still do today. He took me to cockfights. We would sit in the shade of a tree eating rice and pig's feet, betting on the cock we thought would win. Whenever we won, I would get a hug from Lee. He was so delighted. The losing cock was always treated to hot fomentations and much love from the owner, the Thai being quite sentimental about their feathered fighters. One Saturday night, everyone had been invited to a country fair. I was given my first Sing beer by Lee, and the effects were amusing to all, and quite hard on me. My memories of the evening were dancing, betting on racing rats, kickboxing, and eating. I had something like a steak on a stick put in my hand, and I gratefully ate it, hoping that having something in my stomach would make me feel better. It did, and I thanked my host for the meat. "It's nothing," he replied. "Rat very good." I had eaten my first rat, and it tasted pretty good. When I left Pai, Lee stood hugging me around the middle of the bus station with scores of people around. Tears were streaming down his face, and as I got on the bus, he shouted, "I love you, Bill. Please come back." We came across an impala that had been killed about 3 hours ago, and the maggots were crawling all over the carcass. "And would you eat that, Uncle Bill?" asked Andrew, his lips curled in disgust. I took out my knife, cut a long strip of meat off the back leg. I whipped it against the trunk of a Natal mahogany, knocking most of the maggots off, and then held the steak aloft. I dropped the end of it down my throat, and then swallowed the long piece without even chewing. There were screams of horror from the women. Cyril, Ian, and Kieran were smiling, and Andrew was turning green about the gills. I've always been the impulsive, spontaneous one in the family. I leap, hoping there will be enough time to look around and find a place to land. Of my 2 sons, Moz is the thinker, whereas Matt could have been an advertisement for one of those long life batteries that just keep on going and going and going. Somehow, the 3 of us ended up in Rome with only enough money for 2 of us to get back to the airport. I was in a state, but Moz had the answer. "Dad, just wrap Matt up in your jacket and use 2 straps as handles. We'll take him as luggage." And that's exactly what we did. I sent the 2 boys out with their 22 rifles one day, and instructions that they were to shoot something, cook it, eat it, and then come and tell me about it in detail. Moz was back in 3 hours, having shot a dove, cooked it, and ate it. Moz and I went out to looking for Matt just after sundown. It had been hours already. Moz speculated that Matt had shot something too big, and as I had taught them that they had to eat everything, he was still eating. I hoped he was right. We started to track Matt, and soon found where his tracks led up into some koppies. We found him sitting next to a fire, slowly eating away on a large rock hyrax. Considering he was only 6 years old at the time and had 4 pounds of meat to eat, no wonder he was taking a long time. Sitting at the lunch table one day, it was discovered that when Matt had something he didn't like on his plate, he would fill his mouth to bursting, leave the table, and spit it out in the toilet. Moz would open his serviette on his lap, casually drop the offending morsels into his lap, fold the serviette, and leave it for the maid to clean later. We discussed rabies one day. "If I ever get rabies, I want you to chain me to a tree, and if I get really bad, you must shoot me," I told Moz. He sat there twirling his forelock of blonde hair, a sign that he was in deep thought. "Dad, should I use the 22 or the 308? "Are you really going to shoot Dad?" asked a shocked Matt. "Only if he gets rabies," replied Moz in his measured way of speaking. I think that's a reference to When the Lion Feeds, which is a historical novel by Wilbur Smith. I'm actually going to read that on here one of these days. Probably one of my favorite historical novels. In school, Moz was described by his friends as the glue that holds us all together. Matt was feared by all. His report card said, "I like Matt, but I'm certain he doesn't like me." It wasn't long after this that I got a letter from Matt telling me of a teacher that was bullying some of the younger boys, and he wanted my permission to beat up the bully. I got the permission and later got a letter from Matt. I caught my teacher bullying that small boy again. I slammed him up against the wall and told him that I had your permission to beat him up if I ever saw him bullying again. I don't think he will bother our classes again. Matt was 11 years old at the time. The teacher was later fired for child abuse. Sure. That's brilliant. 4 years ago, I had 120 tons of Capenta and nowhere to sell it. It was Moz that came up with the idea of buying our own outlet. This we did, and in no time we were selling the cheapest Capenta in town. Moz became the factory manager. When December came along, Moz told me I was to go with Dave Walters, the Mopani worm king, and buy worms with him. Mopani worms are the most famous delicacy in all Africa. They are a hairless caterpillar with a hard head and backside and a double row of spines all the way down the back. They are from 2 to 4 inches in length and brightly colored in red, black, and yellow. It is the job of the women to prepare the Mopani worms, and their hands are cut to shred with the spines. The caterpillar is picked up, milked from head towards the back to get rid of all the insides, and then either smoked or boiled in salt water and then dried. The only way to tell if they've been properly prepared is to eat a small piece. Dave and I bought 93 tons, and out of each bag I ate half a Mopani worm. I spoke of marula seeds being a good elephant roughage. You can imagine a few dry Mopani worms going through your system every day. As I can speak enough Ndebele to get along, I would speak with the ladies all day long. I would examine their hands and compliment them on the fine preparation of their worms. This was something Dad taught me to do. Everything that was ever sold, whether it be a goat, cow, or chicken, had taken the owner some effort to get it to that state. Especially with cows, you had to find out the history, the cow's name, how many calves it had, and the character or personality. It was not only their culture, it was a way of showing respect. I had witnessed the Rwanda genocide in 1963, and here again in Zimbabwe I saw the results of tribalism. People make laws about racialism, where people call each other names. Strange how nothing is ever done about tribalism, where people are killed or mutilated. One morning I plucked up my courage and asked a lady why she had no lips. She pulled her 15-year-old daughter from behind her and showed me where they had cut the child's hand off. Others came forward and showed me ears, eyelids, noses, breasts that had been cut off. Tears flowed unabashedly as stories of friends and relatives were related. I couldn't help but think how crazy life is. 100 years ago, the Ndebele were stopped from wiping out the Shona tribe by the white settlers, by the way. Today, the Shona tribe are the majority, also controlling the politics, and the Ndebele are suffering the brunt of tribalism. From about 1982 to 1987, Mugabe's government slaughtered between 50 and 100,000 Ndebele civilians, burying them in mass graves, and there's been no justice done for it to this day. It's called the Kukuruhundi massacres. Colin Miller worked for me as a dentist for a few years. He is a very quiet and gentle person. As he was single, he would often get appointments with young ladies with perfect teeth. It took about a year before he started to talk to me. I would almost gag at the sight of him eating porridge for lunch, and he would always call me a savage. Who eats porridge for lunch? His dental assistant was a bombshell of note. Marianne was everything that Colin wasn't. He was dark-haired, she was blonde. He was soft-spoken, she was loud. He was stiff and unapproachable, she was warm and huggable. He was very gentle, she was like a bull at the gate. He hardly spoke, she spoke all the time. He embarrassed easily, it was impossible to embarrass Marianne. It was the perfect match. As Colin's surgery was next to mine, we couldn't help but hear the story related to Colin. Marianne worked at the Cattleman restaurant for a spell. Her father, Ted White, came to visit from Australia and would pick her up every night to take her home. As she was allowed to have dinner, she would always instruct Ted to come at 9:30 so she could have a quick meal. But every evening, Ted would be there at 9:15, hooting his horn and rushing her. On this particular evening, Ted was there hooting and carrying on as usual. Marianne had just gotten herself a plate of garlic mushrooms, and so as to not keep her father waiting, she inhaled the lot and ran out to the car. All the way home she felt ill. As soon as they got into the house, Marianne ran to the kitchen for a drink of water, while Ted went to the restroom. Before Marianne could get a drink, she grabbed a plate and brought up all those mushrooms. When Ted came out of the restroom, Marianne shot in there and washed out her mouth, gargled, and generally cleaned up. She came back to the kitchen where she found Ted. Those were good. Sorry, wrong. I've forgotten how to do an Australian accent. Those are good mushrooms. Just a bit oily, exclaimed Ted. I think I'll go and boil a tin of sweetened condensed milk now for 3 hours and make some caramel so as to send my tongue into raptures of glory. Alright, thanks for listening, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Sleep well. See you next time. Cheers.